Story 1, The Frozen Mile. The thermometer in my Peterbilt read minus 47 degrees when I realized I'd been driving past the same abandoned truck stop for the sixth time in 20 minutes. Not 6 different truck stops. The same one. The frosty spruce, with its shattered neon sign and that green Ford Ranger parked at the same impossible angle against the ice-covered dumpster. I'd marked it in my mind the first time, noted the license plate, Alaska Commercial 447JXM, because something about the scene felt wrong. Now I was watching my odometer climb, the numbers rolling forward, 63 miles since Fairbanks, but that truck stop kept appearing every 3.5 miles exactly. I'd pass it, watch it disappear in my mirrors, and then there it would be again, approaching on my right like some kind of frozen déjà vu. My name is Robert Hayes, 42 years old, been hauling freight up the Dalton Highway for 19 years. I know this road the way I know my daughter's face, every turn, every grade, every place where the permafrost buckles the asphalt into washboard ridges that'll rattle your fillings loose. The Dalton doesn't play games. It kills you with cold, with ice, with 100-mile stretches of nothing but white and dark and the northern lights twisting overhead like something alive. But it doesn't loop. Roads don't loop. It was March 14th, 2023. I was hauling drilling equipment north to Deadhorse, 48,000 pounds of pipe and machinery in my reefer trailer. The temperature had dropped fast after Fairbanks, and I'd been making good time, running through the darkness at 1:30 in the morning with my high beams cutting through snow that fell in thick, lazy flakes. My CB radio had been quiet for 2 hours. The last voice I'd heard was Sarah Mitchell heading south, warning about black ice near the Yukon River Bridge. Since then, nothing but static and the diesel engine's steady rumble. The 7th time I passed the frosty spruce, I slowed down. My hand shook as I reached for the CB handset. The static was different now, rhythmic, almost like breathing. I keyed the microphone. This is Boreal Transport, northbound at mile marker 183. Anyone copy? The static pulsed. Then a voice came through, distant and hollow, like someone talking from the bottom of a well. Robert Hayes, you're not at mile marker 183. My blood went cold. I hadn't given my name. Who is this? Look at your GPS. I'd been avoiding the GPS. Some instinct had kept my eyes away from it, but now I looked down at the screen mounted on my dash. The blue line showing my route was there, but the truck's position marker was gone. Instead, the screen showed dozens of overlapping blue dots, forming a tight circle around a single point on the map. Each dot pulsed in sequence, and I realized I was looking at my own position recorded over and over, 7 different times in the exact same location. What the fuck is this? I said into the CB, not even keying the mic. You drove into it at mile marker 167, the voice said anyway. 16 minutes ago. There was a shimmer in the air like heat rising off summer asphalt, except it's 47 below. You didn't stop. You should have stopped. I had seen something like that. A distortion hanging over the road, barely visible in my headlights like the air itself was folding. I'd thought it was my tired eyes playing tricks, or ice crystals catching the light in some strange way. I'd driven right through it. What do I do? My voice cracked. Every time you complete the loop, it gets colder. Check your thermometer. Minus 51 degrees, 4 degrees colder than minutes ago. I pushed down on the accelerator and my Peterbilt surged forward. The frosty spruce fell behind and I watched my odometer tick forward. 3.4 miles, 3.5. Then there it was again, appearing out of the darkness like a photograph developing, the same green Ranger, the same angle, the same everything. Minus 54 degrees. It's feeding on the heat, the voice said. On your engine heat, your body heat, the friction of your tires on the ice. Each loop, it takes more. Eventually, your diesel will gel. Your engine will seize. You'll coast to a stop, and then you'll freeze, and then you'll become part of the loop, too. Who are you? How do you know this? My name was Daniel Kowalski. I drove through it in November of 2019. Took me 47 loops before my engine died. They found my truck 3 months later, 15 miles south of where I went in. My body was in the cab, frozen solid. But I'm still in here, Robert, still driving the loop. I've watched 11 other drivers come through, watched them all freeze, watched them all stay. I could see something now in my passenger mirror, keeping pace with my truck just outside the reach of my lights. A shape dark against. The snow moving at exactly 63 miles per hour. When I looked directly at it, it wasn't there. But in my peripheral vision, I could see it had the outline of a semi-truck. You can see us now, can't you? Daniel's voice was clearer on the CB, less static. We're all here, all of us who drove into the fold. Linda Martinez, she's been here since 2016. Tom Blackwood from 2012. There are others, older ones, from before CB radios. We can't talk to them. They just drive loop after loop, their trucks rusted away to nothing but still somehow moving. Minus 58 degrees. My headlights were dimming. I could feel it in the engine, a hesitation that wasn't there before, a roughness in the idle. The cold was getting into everything, making the metal contract, the oil thicken, the diesel turn to sludge in the lines. There has to be a way out, I said. You got out, they found your truck. My truck got out, I'm still here. Something about dying in the loop, your heat signature leaves an impression. When you freeze, the fold spits your truck out but keeps you. You become part of its pattern. The 9th loop, and I could see them all now. 5 trucks, no 7, no more than that. A convoy of ghost vehicles running parallel courses just outside reality, all of them trapped in their own private loops that somehow intersected with mine. I could see their drivers through frosted windows, all of them staring forward, hands on wheels, driving forever through the Alaskan night. Minus 63 degrees. My cab heater had given up. My breath came out in clouds so thick I could barely see through them. Ice was forming on the inside of my windshield, creeping in from the edges in fractal patterns that looked almost intentional, almost like writing in some angular language I couldn't read. The fold is getting stronger, Daniel said. Every driver it catches makes it bigger, more stable. Eventually, it'll be permanent. A loop of highway that'll trap anyone who drives through it. The whole Dalton Highway will become a graveyard. I was shaking so hard I could barely hold the wheel. My fingers were wooden, unresponsive. The 10th loop approached, the frosty spruce appearing again out of the darkness, and I realized something. The Green Ranger. It had been parked at the same impossible angle every single time, but I'd never wondered why. Now I did. The Ranger, I said into the CB. Whose truck is that? Silence, long enough that I thought Daniel had faded, gone back to wherever the dead drivers went when they weren't talking. That's where the fold is anchored, he finally said. That's the center point, the first vehicle that ever got trapped. Been there since 1974. Driver's name was Thomas Bright. He was hauling supplies to Prudhoe Bay back when the pipeline was new. Hit a pocket of something, some weakness in the fabric of the world that the cold and the dark made worse. His truck became the anchor and everything else wraps around it. Minus 68 degrees. 11 loops. 12. My engine was stuttering now, coughing like a dying man. The oil pressure gauge was dropping, the engine temperature falling despite the diesel burning in the cylinders. The laws of thermodynamics were breaking down, heat flowing backward, energy draining into some impossible sink. I could see my breath freezing in midair, tiny ice crystals forming and falling like snow inside my cab. My beard was solid ice. My eyelashes stuck together when I blinked. "There's maybe one chance," Daniel said. His voice was fading, or maybe my radio was dying, battery freezing solid. "The Ranger. If you could hit it hard enough, fast enough, maybe break the anchor, but you'd have to leave the road, drive straight at it. And Robert, the fold doesn't like being touched. It'll fight back." -72 degrees. I didn't have a choice. My engine would be dead in 2 more loops, 3 at most. I'd freeze in 4. I aimed my Peterbilt at the frosty spruce, at the Green Ranger sitting there like it had been waiting for 49 years. I pushed the accelerator to the floor. My truck left the road at 90 miles per hour, 48,000 pounds of momentum carrying me across the frozen parking lot. The world twisted, and I saw it then, really saw it, the fold in space that the Ranger anchored. It was beautiful and horrible, a spiral of frozen time wrapping around the old truck, every loop I'd driven simultaneously existing as ghostly overlays of highway phasing in and out of visibility. I hit the Ranger dead center. The impact was wrong. Not the crunch of metal and plastic, but a sound like glass bells shattering, like ice screaming. The fold convulsed, and for one brief moment I saw all of them, every driver trapped in the loop, dozens of translucent figures in dozens of translucent trucks, all occupying the same space, all looking at me with eyes full of frozen hoe. "P." Then the world snapped back, and I was on the Dalton Highway, still moving north, my truck barely damaged despite the collision I knew had happened. My thermometer read -43 degrees. Warm, impossibly warm after the cold I'd been enduring. My GPS showed my position clearly, solidly at mile marker 169. 2 miles north of where I'd entered the fold. I keyed my CB with fingers that could barely move. "Daniel, anyone." Nothing but normal static. I drove the rest of the way to Deadhorse on pure adrenaline and terror. And when I got there, I reported my truck for a full inspection, claimed I'd hit something on the road. The mechanics found nothing wrong except a strange pattern of ice damage on my front bumper, crystalline fractals that looked almost like fingerprints, like someone or something had grabbed my truck and held on. But here's what I can't stop thinking about, what I see every time I close my eyes. In that moment when the fold broke open, when I saw all the trapped drivers, I counted them. 47 different trucks, 47 different drivers, all frozen in their eternal loops. I only heard Daniel mention 11 drivers by name, including himself. So where did the other 36 come from? How long has the fold been catching people? And what happens to the drivers no one remembers, the ones too old or too lost for even the ghosts to recall? I haven't driven the Dalton Highway since March 14th. I've filed for different routes, taken pay cuts, done whatever it takes to avoid that stretch of road. But every night I dream I'm back in the loop, back in the cold. And every night the temperature drops a little more. Sometimes, late at night, my CB radio turns itself on. Static fills my living room, and underneath it, I swear I can hear Daniel's voice, fainter now, farther away, saying the same thing over and over. "You didn't break the anchor, Robert. You just moved it, and now it's hungry again." Asterisk story 2, the breathing cargo. The screaming started somewhere around Talk, and by the time I reached the Canadian border, I'd convinced myself it was just the reefer unit malfunctioning. Refrigerated trailers make all kinds of sounds, metal contracting and expanding, coolant lines hissing, compressors cycling on and off. But metal doesn't scream in rhythm with your heartbeat, and compressors don't stop when you hold your breath. Patricia Sullivan, that's me. 51 years old, running the Alaska-Canada corridor for Morrison Freight out of Anchorage. 23 years behind the wheel, and I'd hauled everything from fresh salmon to drilling equipment. Never had a problem with my cargo except the occasional broken seal or temperature fluctuation. But this shipment, I should have known something was wrong the moment I saw the paperwork. The bill of lading was handwritten, not printed. That alone was strange. The cargo was listed as organic research materials. Destination address in Whitehorse, Yukon Territory, pickup location, a facility 30 miles outside Palmer that wasn't on any map I'd ever seen. The road to the facility was unmarked, just a turnoff into spruce forest that felt wrong the moment I took it, like the trees were leaning in, watching. The facility itself was a single concrete building. No windows, no signage, just a loading dock and a woman in a white coat who never made eye contact. She watched while two men in hazmat suits loaded 5 large containers into my trailer, each one roughly the size of a coffin, made of some kind of dark polymer I didn't recognize. They used a forklift, but I could see them straining, like the containers weighed far more than they should. "Keep the temperature at exactly 34 degrees, the woman said. "Not 33, not 35, exactly 34, do you understand?" I told her I understood. She handed me the handwritten bill of lading and a satellite phone. "If anything happens, call this number immediately. Don't open the trailer. Don't investigate, just call." That was October 9th, 2022. I should have refused the job right then. The first 200 miles were fine, just normal highway driving, my reefer unit humming along, maintaining the temperature within 1/10 of a degree. I checked it obsessively, every few minutes making sure the digital readout stayed locked at 34.0. The sun set around 7 p.m., and I drove into darkness with the Alaska Range looming to my right, mountains like black teeth against the stars. The screaming started at mile marker 173. At first, I thought it was wind. Then I thought it was my Jake brake engaging, even though my foot wasn't on the brake. Then I realized it was coming from the trailer, a high-pitched sound that rose and fell like breathing, like someone in pain trying not to make noise. I pulled over at the next turnout, grabbed my flashlight and walked back to CK the trailer. The reefer unit was working perfectly, temperature steady at 34 degrees. No visible damage to the exterior. No signs of anything wrong. But when I pressed my ear against the side panel, I could hear it clearly. Not one scream, but 5, overlapping, each one coming from a different location inside the trailer, each one matching the position of one of the 5 containers. I called the number on the satellite phone. It rang 17 times before someone picked up. "What's wrong?" A man's voice, flat, emotionless. "My cargo is making noise." "Is the temperature stable?" "Yes, but..." "Then there's no problem. Continue to Whitehorse." "Something is screaming in my trailer." "The containers are sealed. Nothing can get out. Maintain 34 degrees and continue to Whitehorse." He hung up. I stood in the turnout for 10 minutes, listening to the wind and the screaming, trying to decide what to do. I could refuse to go further, park the truck, wait for Morrison Freight to send someone else. But the satellite phone had no other numbers programmed into it, and my cell phone had lost signal 20 miles back. I was alone on the Alaska highway in the middle of the night with cargo that shouldn't be making any sound at all. I got back in my cab and started driving. The screaming changed near the Canadian border. It became rhythmic, purposeful, like something trying to communicate. 5 different voices, 5 different pitches, but they were synchronizing, finding harmony. It was beautiful in a horrible way, like hearing angels in hell. I crossed into Canada at 11:47 p.m. The border guard seemed normal, checked my paperwork, scanned my passport, asked about my cargo. I told him organic research materials. He nodded, handed back my documents, and waved me through. As I pulled away, I looked in my mirror and saw him standing in the booth, holding a phone to his ear, watching my truck disappear into the darkness. He knew, whatever was in my trailer, he knew about it. The temperature gauge started fluctuating around 1 a.m. Nothing major, just small variations, 34.2, 33.8, 34.1. But the screaming responded to each fluctuation, getting louder when the temperature rose, quieter when it fell. Whatever was in those containers, it was reacting to the environment. It was aware. I was 50 miles from Whitehorse when I felt the trailer shift. Not a normal shift like cargo settling, but a deliberate movement, weight transferring from one side to the other, rocking my whole rig. I checked my mirrors and saw nothing wrong, but I could feel it. Something inside the trailer moving, pacing, testing the limits of its confinement. The satellite phone rang. I nearly drove off the road in surprise. "Pull over," the man's voice said. "What's happening?" "You're early. You're 2 hours ahead of schedule. You need to delay. Drive slower. Stop if you have to. You cannot arrive in Whitehorse before 4:37 a.m. "Why? What's going to happen at 4:37? "Nothing will happen if you arrive after that time. But if you arrive before, the containers will rupture. Do you understand? The containers will rupture and what's inside will be released." "What's inside them?" He hung up again. I pulled over at a rest area near Haines Junction. It was 2:17 a.m. I had over 2 hours to kill. The screaming had stopped, and the silence was somehow worse, like whatever was in the trailer was listening, waiting. I tried to rest, but every few minutes I'd feel the trailer shift again, gentle rocking motions that weren't caused by wind or settling. Something was moving in there, something big enough to make 48,000 pounds of truck and cargo sway. At 3:15 a.m., I heard scratching. Not from inside the containers, but from inside the trailer itself, like something was free. Something had gotten out, and it was exploring. The scratching moved from front to back, methodical, purposeful, like it was mapping the space, learning the dimensions of its prison. I grabbed the satellite phone and called the number. No answer. I called again, nothing. The temperature gauge dropped to 33.3 degrees. The reefer unit was running full blast, but something was overwhelming it. Something was generating heat inside the trailer, raising the ambient temperature faster than the refrigeration could compensate. At 3:49 a.m., I heard my trailer doors rattle, metal on metal, like something was testing the locks from the inside. I started my engine and pulled back onto the highway. I didn't care about their timeline anymore. I needed to get this cargo delivered and get away from it. I pushed my Kenworth hard, faster than I should have been driving on unfamiliar roads in the darkness, racing toward Whitehorse like I was being chased. Because I was being chased, I could see it in my mirrors. Now a shadow inside my trailer, visible through the small gaps around the door seals. Something dark and moving. Something that hadn't been there when I loaded the cargo in Palmer. The temperature gauge hit 35 degrees at 4:19 a.m. The screaming came back, all 5 voices at once, but they weren't screaming anymore. They were chanting something in a language I didn't recognize, guttural and rhythmic, and I could feel the words in my chest, vibrating through the cab, making my teeth ache. Whitehorse appeared out of the darkness at 4:31 a.m. I followed my GPS to the delivery address, a warehouse on the outskirts of town, identical to the facility in Palmer, same concrete construction, same lack of windows, same loading dock. The woman in the white coat was waiting, along with 6 men in hazmat suits. I backed my trailer up to the dock and killed my engine. The temperature gauge read 36.4 degrees and rising. The chanting had become so loud I could barely hear my own thoughts. "You're early," the woman said. "I don't care. Get this shit out of my trailer." "We need to wait 6 more minutes." "Why?" She looked at me, really looked at me for the first time, and I saw something in her eyes I'd never seen before. Not fear exactly, but awareness. Terrible, exhaustive awareness of something beyond normal understanding. Because at 4:37 a.m. the sun rises, and what's in your trailer can't survive sunrise. If we open the doors before then, if even one photon of sunlight touches what's inside, it'll spread. Do you understand? It'll spread into everything living, and we won't be able to contain it. We stood there in the pre-dawn darkness, listening to my trailer tear itself apart from the inside. The chanting had become frantic, desperate, 5 voices pleading in that horrible language. The temperature gauge hit 39 degrees, 40, 42. Frost was melting off my trailer in streams, steam rising from the metal. At 4:36 a.m., one of the men in hazmat suits pointed to the eastern horizon. A thin line of light, barely visible, just the promise of sunrise. At 4:37 a.m. exactly, the woman nodded, and the men opened my trailer doors. Light spilled out. Not sunlight, but something else, something that had been inside the containers, some kind of bioluminescence that glowed sickly green in the darkness. The 5 containers were open, lids torn off from the inside, and I could see what had been in them. Bodies, human bodies, but wrong. Limbs bent at impossible angles, skin translucent, faces frozen in expressions of agony. And they were covered in something, a fungus or growth that pulsed with that green light, spreading across their skin like networks of veins. The moment sunlight touched them, they stopped moving. The green light dimmed, flickered, went out. The chanting ended mid-syllable. Whatever had been alive in my trailer was dead now, killed by the sun. The men in hazmat suits dragged the containers out one by one, loaded them onto dollies, wheeled them into the warehouse. The woman handed me a check, cash payment, 3 times my normal rate. "This never happened," she said. "You hauled regular cargo, nothing unusual occurred." I took the check and left. Drove straight back to Anchorage without stopping, turned in my truck and quit Morrison Freight the next day. Told them I was retiring, cited health reasons, refused to explain further. But here's what I can't forget. What wakes me up screaming 3, 4 times a week. Those bodies in the containers, they had faces I recognized. Not people I knew personally, but faces I'd seen. On missing person posters. In news reports about hikers who vanished in the Alaska wilderness. 5 people who'd been declared dead, who'd had funerals, who'd been buried or cremated or whatever their families chose. But they weren't dead. They were being kept alive, kept at exactly 34 degrees, infected with something that needed darkness to survive. And the worst part, the part that makes me check my skin every morning for signs of that green luminescence, is that the woman's warning didn't make sense. She said if sunlight touched what was inside, it would spread. But sunlight killed it. I saw it die. Unless what died wasn't the infection. Unless what died was the original host, and the infection needs living tissue to spread. Unless those bodies in my trailer weren't the cargo at all, but the containers, and the real cargo was the thing growing inside them, waiting to be delivered. I drive for a different company now, local routes only, never at night. But sometimes when I'm alone in my apartment, I hear my old CB radio turn itself on, even though I gave it away months ago. And through the static, I hear chanting. 5 voices, the same rhythm, the same words. And every time I hear it, my skin itches. Just a little, just enough to notice. Asterisk Story 3, The Identical Highway. Marcus Chen found me at 3:41 a.m. on January 8, 2023, standing on the side of the Sterling Highway holding a cardboard sign that said Anchorage. He was me, exact same face, same build, same scar over the left eyebrow from a childhood bike accident I'd never told anyone about. And he was terrified. I should explain. My name is Marcus Chen. I'm 37 years old, been running freight out of Kenai for 12 years. I know every mile of the Sterling Highway, the 90-mile stretch between Homer and Anchorage that I've driven thousands of times. I know which curves freeze first in winter, where the moose like to cross, which pull-offs have cell service. I know this road. But the man I picked up knew it too. Knew it exactly the same way I did. When I asked him how he knew about the scar, he pulled down his collar and showed me an identical scar in the identical location. When I asked him where he was from, he gave me my own address in Kenai. When I asked him what his mother's maiden name was, he said Yao, same as mine. "We don't have much time," he said, climbing into my passenger seat. His clothes were torn and he was bleeding from a dozen small cuts on his face and hands. "You need to turn around right now. Do not drive to Anchorage." "Who are you?" "I'm you, from 14 hours ahead. And if you keep driving this route, you're going to experience the worst 14 hours of your life. And then you're going to end up exactly where you just found me, trying to warn yourself. And it won't make any difference because I didn't listen to me either." I should have kicked him out. Should have called the police, reported someone impersonating me, but something in his eyes stopped me. I'd seen that look before in my own mirror after bad accidents, after close calls on icy roads. That wasn't crazy. That was trauma. "Tell me what happens," I said. "I don't know if I can change it. Every time it happens, we remember the previous loop, but it doesn't matter. We make the same decisions because they're the only decisions that make sense at the time. But I have to try. Maybe if I tell you everything, maybe if you're prepared, you can break the pattern." He was shaking, hands trembling so badly he could barely hold them still. I noticed his fingernails were bloody, torn, like he'd been clawing at something. "In 47 miles, you're going to see brake lights ahead. A semi-truck jackknifed across both lanes. You'll slow down, try to figure out a way around it, and you'll see the driver. He'll be standing next to his truck, waving at you, trying to flag you down. Do not stop. Do not help him. Drive off-road if you have to, but get past that truck and keep going." "Why, what's wrong with the driver?" "He's not the driver. The real driver is still in the cab, dead. What's standing next to the truck is wearing his face, but it's not human. And if you stop, it'll get close enough to touch you, and then everything changes." I was driving slowly now, processing what he was saying, trying to decide if this was an elaborate prank or a mental health crisis or something worse. "What do you mean, wearing his face?" "Exactly that. It peels them off whole and wears them like masks." I stopped to help. It got within 3 feet of me and I saw behind the mask, saw what was underneath. Then I ran, got back in my truck and drove, but it followed me. The Sterling Highway stretched ahead in my headlights, snow-covered spruce trees pressing close on both sides. Normal, familiar. But the man next to me, the man with my face, made everything feel wrong. "After you pass the jackknife truck, you'll drive for 16 miles. Everything will seem fine. You'll think maybe I was crazy, maybe you made the right choice not stopping. Then you'll see another truck on the side of the road, different model, different position. and you'll see yourself. In myself, standing next to it, waving for help. Same clothes you're wearing right now, same jacket, same boots. It'll be you, exact copy, and you'll slow down because how could you not? How could you not stop when you see yourself stranded on the side of the road? My hands tightened on the wheel. Did you stop? No, because 14 hours ago, a different version of me was sitting in my passenger seat telling me not to. But I slowed down, tried to get a closer look, and that's when I saw there were two of them. Two of me standing next to that truck. One of them was waving. The other one was just staring. And when I drove past, both of them ran after my truck. "Well, this doesn't make sense," I said. "None of this makes sense." It doesn't have to make sense, it just has to be true. And here's where it gets worse. Every time you see yourself, there'll be more, 3 at the next breakdown, 7 after that, 14, 28. They're multiplying, doubling every time, and they're all you, all perfect copies, but none of them are. Real. They're all things wearing your face, and they want you to stop, want you to get out of your truck. Because once you're outside, once you're standing with them, you become one of them. We drove in silence for 10 minutes. I kept checking my odometer, watching the miles tick by, counting down to mile marker 47, where he said the jackknifed truck would be. "Why is this happening?" I finally asked. "I don't know. Maybe it's always been happening, and we're just the first ones to remember. Maybe it's something specific to this highway, to this route, to this night. All I know is that it ends in Anchorage, and it ends bad." "What happens in Anchorage?" He turned to look at me, and in the green glow of my dashboard lights, I could see tears on his face. My face, our face. "You arrive at the warehouse to deliver your cargo. You back up to the loading dock. And when you open your trailer doors, you see them, all of them. Every copy that chased you on the highway, hundreds of them, maybe thousands, all crowded into your trailer, all wearing your face, all staring at you with empty eyes. And you realize they weren't following you. They were already there. They've always been there. You've been hauling them this whole time." Mile marker 47. My headlights caught red reflectors ahead, a truck across the road, exactly as he described. I could see a figure standing next to it, arm raised, waving. I kept driving. The figure turned as I approached, and I saw its face. Saw my face looking back at me from the side of the road, mouth open in a cry I couldn't hear over my engine. I steered onto the shoulder, felt my tires bite into snow and gravel, drove around the jackknife truck with inches to spare. In my mirror, I watched the figure break into a run, chasing my truck with impossible speed, closing the distance even though I was doing 40 miles per hour. Then the man next to me, my passenger, my other self, grabbed my CB radio and keyed the microphone. "It can't follow if you acknowledge it," he said into the radio. "If you broadcast that you see it, if you put it into words, it loses its hold." He described what we'd seen, detailed and specific, speaking into the CB even though no one responded. And in my mirror, the running figure slowed, stopped, faded into the darkness. "That buys us time," he said, "but there are more ahead." 16 miles later, I saw my truck on the side of the road. Two figures in my clothes, wearing my face, one waving, one staring. I didn't slow down. My passenger narrated their presence over the CB, and they faded too. But he was right about the multiplication. 3 at the next location, 7 after that, 14, 28. By the time I was 30 miles from Anchorage, there were 56 copies of me standing in a cluster on the shoulder, and broadcasting their existence wasn't making them fade anymore. They were staying solid, staying real, and they were all watching my truck pass. "It's not working," I said. "I know. It stopped working for me too, right around here. That's when I realized the truth." "What truth?" We're not breaking the loop. We're creating it. Every time I warn myself, every time I try to change the outcome, I just make another iteration. Another Marcus Chen who experiences the same 14 hours, who ends up on the Sterling Highway at 3:41 a.m. trying to warn the next one. We're stuck in it. I pulled over. The copies of me were visible in my mirrors now, dozens of them, all walking toward my truck in synchronized steps. So what do we do? I think, he said slowly, we have to stop trying to escape. We have to go to Anchorage. We have to open the trailer and see what's inside. Maybe that's the only way the loop ends. Or maybe that's exactly what they want. Maybe, but what other choice do we have? We drove the last 30 miles in silence, watching the copies multiply in impossible numbers. By the time we reached Anchorage, there were hundreds of them lining the highway, thousands maybe, all standing perfectly still, all watching us pass. I followed my GPS to the warehouse. The loading dock was empty, lights on, bay door open. I backed my trailer up, feeling the familiar thunk of rubber bumpers meeting concrete. My passenger, my other self, climbed out first. I followed. My hands were shaking as I unlatched the trailer doors. Inside was darkness, absolute and complete, deeper than any shadow should be. And then movement, shuffling, the sound of hundreds of feet on metal floor. They came out slowly. Every copy we'd seen on the highway, every iteration of Marcus Chen that had chased us, all of them climbing out of my trailer in a steady stream. They surrounded us, a circle of identical faces, identical clothes, identical scars over identical left eyebrows. And then they spoke, all of them at once in perfect unison. Which one of us is real? I looked at my passenger. He looked back at me, neat. Her of us had an answer. One of the copies stepped forward, holding out a cardboard sign. It said Anchorage in my handwriting. In 14 hours, it said, one of you will be standing on the Sterling Highway at mile marker 47. You'll try to warn yourself. It won't work. It never works. Because we're all copies, my passenger said. The real Marcus Chen died on this route months ago, years ago, and we're all just echoes, all just iterations of his last drive, playing out over and over. No, I said, that's not true. I'm real. I have memories, childhood, family. I have a life outside this highway. So do I, my passenger said. So do all of them, but memories can be copied too. Everything that makes you can be reproduced. So which one is the original? How do we know? I didn't have an answer. Still don't. That was 6 months ago, and I'm still driving the Sterling Highway, still making my runs between Kenai and Anchorage. But now, every time I pass mile marker 47 at 3:41 a.m., I see myself standing on the side of the road, holding a sign, trying to flag down a truck. Sometimes I'm the one driving. Sometimes I'm the one on the roadside. I can never tell which version I'll be until it happens, and every 14 hours the loop starts over. The worst part isn't not knowing if I'm real. The worst part is that it doesn't matter anymore. Real or copy, I'm trapped in the same pattern, living the same night, warning myself about something I can never prevent. Last week I started keeping a journal, writing down everything that happens in each loop. But when I check previous entries, they're in different handwriting. Not different enough that anyone else would notice, but I notice. Because they're written by other versions of me, other Marcus Chens experiencing slightly different iterations of the same event. And the entries are multiplying. The journal is getting thicker, more versions, more loops, all of us writing our experiences, all of us trying to find a way out, all of us failing. Sometimes I wonder what the original Marcus Chen would think if he could see what he's become. Hundreds of copies, maybe thousands now, all trapped on the same stretch of highway, all wearing his face, all living his last drive on infinite repeat. But mostly I just drive, because that's all any of us can do. Drive and wait for 3:41 a.m. and hope that maybe this time something will be different. It never is. Asterisk Story 4, The Weight of Emptiness. Jennifer Kowalski had been dead in my passenger seat for 943 miles when her seatbelt clicked open by itself. I know the exact mileage because I'd been watching my odometer since Fairbanks, watching the numbers roll forward, trying to focus on anything except the corpse sitting 2 feet away from me. She died at mile marker 812, somewhere between Delta Junction and Talk, and now I was approaching Whitehorse with a body I couldn't explain, and a truck that was getting heavier with every mile. My name is James Dutch Morrison, 54 years old, running the Alaska-Canada corridor for 31 years. I'd picked up Jennifer outside Fairbanks at 2:15 a.m. on February 19th, 2023. She was standing in the parking lot of the Weather Vane Hotel, not hitchhiking exactly, just standing there in the snow wearing a light jacket that wasn't nearly warm enough. When I stopped to ask if she needed help, she looked at me with eyes that were too old for her face and said, "I need to get to Whitehorse. It's important that I get to Whitehorse." I should have said no. Company policy is clear about passengers, but it was minus 38 degrees and she would have frozen if I'd left her there. So I told her to get in. She didn't talk much at first, just sat in the passenger seat staring straight ahead, hands folded in her lap. Normal enough for someone who'd been standing in the cold. I tried making conversation, asked her name, where she was from, why she needed to get to Whitehorse. She answered in single words or short phrases, nothing that revealed much about her. Jennifer Kowalski. Anchorage. Family matter. It wasn't until we were an hour into the drive that I noticed she hadn't moved. Not fidgeted, not adjusted her position, not shifted her weight. Just sat perfectly still, hands folded, eyes forward. I asked if she was okay, and she turned to look at me with a smile that didn't reach those too old eyes. "I'm fine, thank you for helping me." At mile marker 812, between heartbeats, she died. I didn't see it happen. One moment she was sitting there, breathing normally, and the next moment she simply wasn't breathing anymore. No gasp, no convulsion, no indication of distress. She just stopped. I pulled over immediately, checked for a pulse, found nothing. Her skin was still warm, but there was no life in her. I grabbed my pH. One to call for help and saw I had no signal. The Alaska highway is like that, long stretches with no coverage, no help, no witnesses. I should have driven back to the nearest town. Should have found a ranger station, a hospital, anywhere with authorities who could handle the situation. But Jennifer had asked specifically for Whitehorse, said it was important. And something in me, some irrational instinct I still don't understand, made me think that getting her to Whitehorse mattered more than following protocol. So I kept driving. That's when my truck started getting heavier. At first, I thought it was my imagination, stress from having a dead woman in my cab affecting my perception. But after 50 miles, I couldn't ignore it anymore. My engine was straining, fuel consumption had increased 20%, and I could feel the weight bearing down on my suspension. I pulled over at a rest area, got out, and checked my trailer. Empty, just like it had been when I'd loaded it in Fairbanks. 28,000 pounds of truck and empty trailer, no cargo, nothing that could account for the additional weight I was feeling. But when I climbed back into the cab, I saw the scale at the rest area's weigh station. It showed my gross weight at 52,000 pounds. I'd gained 24,000 pounds of mass that didn't physically exist. Jennifer was still in the passenger seat, still not breathing, still warm. And she was heavier, too. When I'd checked her pulse initially, she'd weighed maybe 130 pounds. Now, when I touched her shoulder, my hand sank into resistance like she weighed 300 pounds, 400 more. I got back on the highway and drove faster. The weight increased with every mile. By the time I crossed into Canada, my engine was screaming, transmission overheating, brakes barely adequate to slow the mass I was carrying. The border guard asked about my passenger, why she wasn't responding to questions. I told him she was asleep, exhausted from travel. He looked at Jennifer for a long moment, then back at me, and I saw something flicker across his face. Recognition, maybe, or resignation. "Get her to Whitehorse," he said quietly. "Don't stop anywhere else." "Do you know what's happening?" He didn't answer, just waved me through. At mile marker 1,000, my truck could barely maintain 45 miles per hour on flat highway. The weight was crushing, inexorable, and I could see my frame bending under the stress, metal deforming in ways that should have been impossible. My trailer sagged despite being empty, suspension compressed to maximum travel, tires flattened against pavement. And Jennifer kept getting heavier. Her presence was overwhelming now, a physical pressure that filled the cab, made it hard to breathe, made my chest ache with every heartbeat. She was still sitting in the same position, hands folded, eyes open and staring forward, but now I could see that she was sinking into the seat, pressing down through the foam and springs, through the metal frame itself. I tried to talk to her, asked her what was happening, begged her to explain. She didn't respond, but her lips moved slightly, forming words without sound. I leaned closer, trying to read her lips in the dim glow of my dashboard. "We all go to Whitehorse." My CB radio crackled to life. No voice, just static, but the static had rhythm, cadence like breathing, heavy breathing, the breathing of someone or something carrying an impossible weight. 50 miles from Whitehorse, my truck could only manage 20 miles per hour. Other vehicles passed me, drivers staring, confused by the obvious strain of my rig despite the empty trailer. One trucker got on the CB, asked if I needed help, if my engine was failing. I couldn't respond. All my concentration was focused on keeping the truck moving forward, fighting the weight that was trying to drag me down through the pavement. Jennifer's weight had become so extreme that reality was bending around her. The passenger seat had collapsed into the floor, and she was sinking deeper, creating a depression in the metal that shouldn't have been possible. The gravitational distortion was visible now, air rippling around her like heat shimmer, light bending at the edges of her presence. And I realized what was happening. She wasn't getting heavier. She was accumulating mass from somewhere else, pulling it through from some other dimension or state, using her body as an anchor point. Every mile we drove, more mass transferred into her, building up, condensing, creating a concentration of matter that was approaching critical density. "We all go to Whitehorse." Not just her, all of them. However many there had been before her, however many others had died on the Alaska highway and needed to reach Whitehorse, they were all coming through her, all adding their weight to hers, all traveling together in the same borrowed body. The warehouse address she'd given me was on the outskirts of Whitehorse industrial area, no other buildings nearby. I pulled in at 17 miles per hour, engine smoking, frame groaning, every part of my truck on the verge of catastrophic failure. The building's loading dock door was open. Inside, I could see a ramp leading down, descending into darkness that seemed impossibly deep for a warehouse basement. A woman stood at the top of the ramp, middle-aged, wearing an expression of profound sadness. I stopped my truck as close as I could to the door. The weight was unbearable now, Jennifer's mass so concentrated that I could feel my own body being pulled toward her, gravity warping, time dilating. My watch was running slow. My breathing felt sluggish. Reality itself was struggling to contain what she'd become. The woman approached my passenger door and opened it. Jennifer, still in her sitting position, still maintaining that perfect stillness, rotated slightly to face her. "Welcome home," the woman said. Jennifer smiled, really smiled this time, warmth and relief flooding her face. And then she moved. Not stood up, but allowed herself to fall, pulled by her own impossible mass, dropping through the loading dock floor, through the ramp, descending into the darkness below with a sound like distant thunder. The moment she disappeared, my truck lifted. Weight vanishing instantly, suspension rebounding so hard my tires left the ground for a moment. My engine revved freely. My frame straightened with audible pops of stressed metal relaxing. "What was that?" I asked the woman. "What was she?" "Someone who needed to come home. They all do eventually. The highway takes them one way or another, accident or illness or hypothermia, and they die in transit. But something in the cold, something in the darkness, something about Alaska won't let them rest. They need to reach Whitehorse, need to go down into the darkness where they can finally be still." "How many have there been?" 47 this year, hundreds over the decades. They all find someone willing to carry them, someone kind enough to pick up a stranger in the cold, someone like you. She handed me an envelope thick with cash. I didn't want to take it, but she pressed it into my hand. "For your repairs and for your silence." I drove back to Alaska on roads that felt too light, too insubstantial, like I might float away if I drove too fast. My truck handled perfectly despite the damage, despite the bent frame and blown suspension. It was like the vehicle itself had been released from a burden it had carried too long. But every night since then, I dream about weight, about pressure so intense it bends space itself, about darkness that goes down forever, filled with voices that whisper, "We all go to Whitehorse." And sometimes, when I'm driving the Alaska highway at night, I see them. Figures standing in parking lots, on roadside turnouts at gas stations. They're never hitchhiking, never actively trying to flag anyone down. Just standing there in clothes too light for the cold, waiting for someone to ask if they need help. I don't stop anymore. I can't. Because I know what they are now, what they're carrying, all that accumulated weight of death and distance. And I know that if I stop, if I offer help, they'll climb into my passenger seat and sit perfectly still with their hands folded in their laps. And they'll get heavier with every mile. Last week I saw Jennifer Kowalski again. Same parking lot, same light jacket, same two old eyes. She looked at me as I drove past, and I saw her mouth move, forming words I couldn't hear but understood perfectly. "I need to get to Whitehorse. It's important that I get to Whitehorse." Because death on the Alaska highway isn't an ending. It's just the beginning of a very long, very heavy journey home. Asterisk Story 5, The Correction. My GPS recalculated for the 42nd time in 6 minutes, and that's when I knew the highway was editing itself. Not moving, not shifting, but correcting my route to match some pattern I couldn't see. Every time I deviated, even by inches, that calm female voice would say, "Recalculating," and my blue position dot would snap to a slightly different location, a slightly different trajectory. Thomas Bright, that's me, 49 years old, hauling fuel and supplies on the Denali Highway for 26 years. I know every pothole, every frost heave, every place where the pavement crumbles into gravel. But on November 4th, 2022, the highway I knew started changing, started correcting me, started forcing me onto a route that led somewhere I'd never been. The recalculation started at mile marker 73, just past the Susitna River crossing. I was driving my normal route from Cantwell to Paxson, 3 in the morning, no traffic, just darkness and my headlights and the distant Alaska range white against black sky. Then my GPS beeped. Recalculating. My route changed. Not dramatically, just a slight adjustment, taking me off the main highway onto a parallel service road I'd never noticed before. I corrected back to my usual path. Recalculating. Again showing the service road. I ignored it, stayed on the highway. Recalculating, recalculating, recalculating. The voice was faster now, urgent, overlapping itself. My position dot was flickering between two locations, and I saw that according to the GPS, I was somehow on both roads simultaneously. Impossible. But there it was on my screen, my truck existing in two places at once. Then the highway moved. I don't mean the pavement shifted or cracked. I mean the space itself folded, and suddenly the service road wasn't parallel anymore. It was merged with the highway, occupying the same physical location, both roads existing together like overlapping photographs. My tires were on both surfaces at once. I slammed my brakes. My truck skidded, and I felt the road split beneath me, traction changing in irregular patterns, asphalt and gravel alternating under each tire. When I finally stopped, I was facing 45 degrees off my original heading, and my GPS showed me on a completely different road, one that didn't exist on any map. Route corrected, proceed to destination. What destination? I said to the empty cab. My GPS showed a waypoint 17 miles ahead, marked only with coordinates, no name, no identifying information. I tried to turn around. My wheels wouldn't grip. Every time I steered away from the corrected route, my tires would slip, would find no purchase, like the road itself was slick only in directions I wasn't supposed to go. The only way I could move was forward, along the path the GPS was showing. So I drove. The highway kept correcting itself around me. Side roads would appear and disappear, intersections would rearrange, entire stretches of pavement would fade out and be replaced by different surfaces. I'd drive through a section of frost-heaved asphalt, look in my mirror, and see smooth concrete where the frost heaves had been. The highway was rewriting itself, editing its own history, making adjustments to create a perfect path to wherever it was taking me. Other vehicles appeared sometimes. Cars and trucks passing in the opposite direction, drivers not seeing me, not reacting to my presence. They'd drive right through the space I occupied, and I'd feel a moment of displacement, a brief sensation of being in two places at once, overlapping with their reality but not quite touching it. Recalculating, merging parallel routes. My GPS screen split into multiple views. 4 different roads, all showing my position, all claiming I was driving on them simultaneously. And I could feel it, could feel my truck existing in 4 separate spaces, 4 different versions of the Denali Highway all converging toward that single waypoint. At mile marker 89, I saw myself. Not a doppelganger, not someone who looked like me. Me. My exact truck, same company logo, same dent in the driver's side door from a parking lot accident 3 years ago, same custom mud flaps. It was driving on a parallel version of the highway, 50 yards to my right, and I could see myself in the driver's seat, see my face turned toward me, recognition and horror mixed together. recalculating, consolidating redundant routes. The parallel highway started moving closer. My other self tried to steer away, but the same thing happened to him that happened to me. No traction in any direction except toward convergence. We were being forced together, two versions of the same truck on two versions of the same road, both being corrected toward the same destination. We merged at mile marker 92. One moment there were two trucks, two roads, two Thomas Brights. The next moment there was only one. I felt the collision as a discontinuity rather than an impact, a skip in reality, and suddenly I had memories of driving both routes. I remembered the parallel highway and my main route simultaneously, could recall every detail of both journeys, every thought I'd had in both trucks. Route consolidation complete. Proceed to destination. More versions appeared. Another truck, another me on another parallel road. Then two more. Then five. All of us converging, all being corrected, all heading toward the waypoint that was now only 8 miles ahead. Every time we merged, I gained another set of memories, another perspective, another lifetime of driving this same route in slightly different ways. By the time I was 4 miles from the destination, I'd merged with 17 different versions of myself. I could remember 17 different childhoods, 17 different first trucks, 17 different families. Some had wives, some had husbands, some had children, some were alone. But all of us were Thomas Bright, all of us were 49 years old, all of us drove the Denali Highway, and all of us were being corrected. He waypoint resolved into a building. Industrial facility, no markings, just a concrete structure with a single open bay door. As I approached, I saw hundreds of trucks parked in formation around it, all identical, all empty, all perfectly aligned like they'd been placed by some obsessive hand. You have arrived at your destination, route complete. I pulled into the bay. Inside was a ramp leading down, descending far deeper than any building should go. My truck rolled forward on its own, engine off, momentum carrying me into the darkness. The walls were lined with screens, thousands of them, all showing GPS interfaces, all displaying different routes, all running constant recalculations. At the bottom of the ramp was a massive chamber filled with more trucks. Hundreds, maybe thousands, all parked in perfect rows, all facing the same direction. And in each driver's seat was a Thomas Bright. All of them sitting perfectly still, hands on wheels, eyes forward, merged into a single consolidated reality. A man approached my truck. He looked like every supervisor I'd ever had, every boss, every authority figure, all of them blended together into one average, unremarkable face. Thomas Bright, you've been selected for correction. What is this place? The consolidation facility. Every route has inconsistencies, redundancies, parallel possibilities that waste computational resources. Your route had 17 variants, 17 different ways you could have driven the Denali Highway on November 4th, 2022. We've merged them all into one optimized path. I'm not a path, I'm a person. Can you say for certain which version was the original? You have 17 sets of memories now, 17 different lives. Which one is the real Thomas Bright? I couldn't answer, because he was right. I didn't know which memories were mine and which belonged to the other versions. They were all equally real, all equally valid, all blended together into a composite existence that was somehow less than the sum of its parts. You'll stay here, the man said. Along with all the other consolidated drivers, you're not unique enough to exist separately anymore. You're an average, a mean, a correction that brings outliers back to the baseline, and the highway is more efficient without you causing deviations. He walked away, and I sat in my truck. unable to move, unable to do anything except stare at all the other versions of myself sitting in all the other trucks. We were all thinking the same thoughts, all trapped in the same moment, all understanding that we'd been edited out of reality because our individual existences were deemed redundant. The screens on the walls continued their endless recalculations, adjusting routes, merging possibilities, correcting the highway to match some optimal path that had no room for variation. And I realized this wasn't just happening to me. Everywhere, all across Alaska, all across the world, highways were correcting themselves, consolidating redundant routes, merging parallel possibilities, editing out the inefficiencies of individual existence. That was 3 months ago. I'm still here, still sitting in my truck, still surrounded by all the other versions of myself. Sometimes new drivers arrive, looking confused and terrified as they're consolidated with their variants. Sometimes the man comes back to explain that the highway needs fewer possibilities, fewer deviations, fewer unique paths. And sometimes, late at night when the facility is quiet, I can hear my GPS still recalculating, still trying to find a route out, still showing my position flickering between existence and correction. But there's nowhere to go. The highway has been optimized. The redundancies have been eliminated. And I am now what I always should have been according to the algorithm, perfectly average, perfectly predictable, perfectly corrected. The worst part isn't being trapped. The worst part is wondering if I was ever free. If every drive I ever made, every route I ever chose, was just a deviation waiting to be corrected. If my entire life was nothing more than a computational inefficiency in a system that values optimization over individuality. My GPS screen shows my destination as current location. It never recalculates anymore, because I've already arrived, I've been corrected, and the highway no longer needs to account for my existence. A route complete.